I'm making this video to answer an objection that I get on another video I made about the name of the wild beast, God's Spirit-directed organization, and also how to calculate the number of the wild beast. And so the objection that I'm getting is that if this is indeed the wild beast, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, then what is the first wild beast? Because in the book of Revelation, it mentions two wild beasts. The first wild beast and the image made of the first wild beast. And so I suppose I should first read that scripture, and then I'll use some historical evidence that most people are already aware of to show you who the first wild beast was. So I'll read it. It's from the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and I'll read verse 11 and 12, which introduces the second wild beast. Listen carefully. And I saw another wild beast ascending out of the earth, and it had two horns like a lamb, but it began speaking as a dragon. And it exercises all the authority of the first wild beast in its sight. And it makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first wild beast, whose death stroke got healed. So now remember that in that video I made about the wild beast, I said it was God's Spirit-directed organization. And so that is the image of the first wild beast. Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, are the image of the first wild beast. So what image were they made from of the first wild beast? Well, it's really quite simple. The Bible students. Charles Taze Russell and the Bible students were the first wild beast who suffered a death stroke. And indeed, when Charles Taze Russell died, the Bible Students Association was in dire straits. It almost completely fell apart, and so suffered that death stroke. And yet it was indeed healed. If you want to verify what I'm saying on YouTube, then I recommend that you look up a new Jehovah's Witness video titled Faith in Action Out of Darkness. Do a search on YouTube, and you will indeed find that they agree that the Bible Students Association did suffer a death stroke and almost completely fell apart. Now the scripture in Revelation chapter 13 says that it had two horns like a lamb, and so it appeared benevolent, and yet it began speaking as a dragon, like Satan. So as soon as this image was formed, it began speaking as a dragon. And so I'll ask you to compare some things that were said very early on in the stages of the God Spirit-directed organization, the image of the first wild beast. For instance, in 1920, a book was published entitled Millions Now Living Will Never Die. And so, why would that be speaking as a dragon? Well, compare that phrase to the one found in Genesis, where it says, "You positively will not die." That's exactly what Satan said. And so, during the very first early years of the Jehovah's Witnesses, they indeed did start speaking as a dragon. So what Satan said in Genesis was a lie. He told Eve that she positively will not die. And yet she did. She died. And so in the early stages of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the image of the Bible students, they said, millions now living will never die. And yet those millions that were living then are almost all now dead. And so that was also a lie, speaking as a dragon. So almost immediately in the very early stages of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the new Jehovah's Witness organization the image of the first wild beast, many millions of people were misled. And so now's a good time to continue reading in Revelation chapter 13. And I'll start at verse 14. Listen to what it says. And it misleads those who dwell on the earth because of the signs that were granted it to perform in the sight of the wild beast, while it tells those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the wild beast that had the sword stroke and yet revived. And there was granted to it to give breath to the image of the wild beast, so that the image of the wild beast should both speak and cause to be killed all those who would not in any way worship the image of the wild beast. Now this is very interesting to contemplate, because if you consider the history of Christianity, when a new Christian religion formed, it was usually because of an enormous dispute within the old Christian religion, and there would exist conflict afterwards. So think about Catholicism, and then Protestantism, and then after Protestantism it split into 4 parts. So it reformed into Methodists, Adventists, Presbyterians, and Baptists. And then even after that, those 4 subgroups of Protestantism once again fractured and became Reformed Baptists and Reformed Church this and Reformed Church that, because they had disputes within their own Christian religion, and conflict still exists between them and the religion that preceded them. And yet in this one instance, where a new religion formed from an older religion, where the Bible students originated the Jehovah's Witnesses, that did not happen. In fact, the reverse happened. The new Jehovah's Witnesses organization that formed after the death of Charles Taze Russell venerated their predecessors. And they do that right to today. Even though the doctrinal differences are immense and most often hidden from the rank and file, they still insist on venerating Charles Taze Russell and those Bible student roots. Now the first wild beast, which suffered a death stroke and yet revived, was the Bible Students Association started by Charles Taze Russell. And in fact, when Charles Taze Russell died, it was in jeopardy of completely falling apart. And yet it did revive. And you can still find the Bible Students Association, or it goes by different names today, like the Dawn Millennial Group, but you can still find them on the internet. If you do a Google search, you can find that this Bible Students Association still exists. And they understand their relationship with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And yet their organization still remains completely different. So now in Revelation chapter 13, verse 12, it says that it causes the people who dwell on the earth to worship the first wild beast. And yet later on in Revelation chapter 13, it also speaks of worshiping the image of the wild beast. In chapter 15, in verse 15, it says, "And there was granted to it to give breath to the image of the wild beast, so that the image of the wild beast should both speak and cause to be killed all those who would not in any way worship the image of the wild beast," or God's Spirit-directed organization. Now it causes to be killed all those who will not worship the image of the first wild beast, which is God's Spirit-directed organization. And so it is indeed an act of worship, because Jehovah's Witnesses have to make an actual vow, a public vow, in front of witnesses about their dedication to God's Spirit-directed organization. And any Christian who is being baptized should hope that his baptismal vow his dedication arrives in the actual temple of God before Jesus Christ and Jehovah to be heard and to be valid, because after all it is a new covenant, a contract, a contractual agreement. And so this veneration or dedication to God's Spirit-directed organization is in fact worship. Now, any Jehovah's Witness already knows that if they were to start defaming in any way God's Spirit-directed organization, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society or its governing body, then they will be disfellowshipped, killed. And now also, however, if a Jehovah's Witness was to start defaming Charles Taze Russell and the Bible students inside their own congregation and persisted in doing so, then they would likely also be disfellowshipped. So, there you go. I hope that now answers the objection that I get about who the first wild beast might be if God's Spirit-directed organization is the image of that first wild beast. Now you know. So if you're watching this video for the first time and haven't seen the video on how to calculate the number of the wild beast or why the name might be God's Spirit-directed organization, then I recommend that you now watch those videos, and I'll put a link in the details below. You should also watch the video I made on how a Jehovah's Witness is marked randomly on either the forehead or the hand to receive the mark of the wild beast and the number of its name.